She was the daughter of a soldier, taken by the very man her father called an enemy. But what started as a kidnapping turned into a love that defied history and a truth that shattered everything she believed. What would you do if your greatest enemy showed you the real meaning of courage? Stay with us to uncover the story that no one dared to tell. The desert had a way of keeping secrets. Its silence stretched for miles, broken only by the crunch of hooves on brittle rock and the occasional whisper of wind against the canyon walls. For Eleanor Whitmore, that silence felt louder than any scream. She sat tall in her saddle, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face from the cruel Arizona sun, but no amount of cloth or leather could protect her from the weight pressing down on her heart. The mission, her father said, was routine. Just a ride through Apache territory to Fort Lowell. Just a diplomatic gesture. Just another promise cloaked in uniforms and flags. But Eleanor had long ago learned that when her father said just, it meant danger wasn't far behind. Captain Marcus Whitmore led the convoy with the same rigid precision he had enforced since the war. A tall man with a spine like steel and eyes that missed nothing, he was both revered and feared, and beside him rode his daughter, dressed not as a lady of society, but in practical riding clothes stained with dust and sweat, an unwilling symbol of peace. "You don't send flowers into battle," Eleanor once whispered to herself. But that's exactly what he had done. They were 20 soldiers strong, flanked by supply wagons and dust that refused to settle. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, an unforgiving blue that promised no rain, only heat. Eleanor's throat burned with dryness. Her lips cracked from wind and sun, but her eyes stayed sharp. Something about this ride, it didn't feel right. It hadn't from the start. Beside her, Lieutenant Granger tried once again to strike conversation. "We'll reach the fort by sundown," he said, offering a gentle smile. "Maybe even before if we press on." She nodded, but said nothing. Granger was kind-eager and too naive for the road ahead. She didn't dislike him. He was earnest in a way that might have moved her in another life. But this journey wasn't meant for pleasantries. Something darker pulsed beneath the sun. A low whistle of wind carried a strange scent. Smoke, or dust, disturbed too suddenly, Eleanor stiffened. Her eyes scanned the distant ridges flanking the trail, a labyrinth of red stone and shadow. The place felt ancient, as though it remembered blood. And then it happened. A cry shattered the quiet, not of man or beast, but of war. In an instant, the desert erupted. From the cliffs, warriors descended on horseback, silent phantoms until that moment. Arrows flew like whispers of death. Rifle shots cracked the air. Horses screamed and reared. The line of soldiers crumbled in confusion. Behind me, her father roared, pistol drawn. But Eleanor's mare bucked hard. She lost her grip and tumbled to the ground, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. She rolled onto her back in time to see a warrior thundering toward her, a man cloaked in dust and shadow, eyes blazing beneath a crimson band. He leapt from his horse with terrifying ease, landing inches from her. "Drop your weapons or she dies," the man bellowed in perfect English. Everything froze. Captain Whitmore, still holding his gun, stared with murderous rage. "Nylona," he growled, "you bastard." The warrior, Nylona, met his glare with an unsettling calm. "You speak of honor, yet you raid our homes and murder our children." He knelt beside Eleanor and hauled her to her feet. "Now you'll understand what it means to lose something valuable." Eleanor struggled, but Nylona's grip was firm. There was no cruelty in his eyes, just determination. She could smell the earth on him, the sun and sweat and pain of 1,000 broken promises. "I'll give you 1 week," Whitmore barked, aiming his pistol with a shaking hand. "Return her, or I'll hunt you to hell and back. Nyalona gave a single nod. 1 week, no more. Before Eleanor could scream protest or run, she was lifted onto Nyalona's horse, her hands pinned before her. The animal surged forward, carrying them away from the battlefield, from the only world she'd ever known. The pounding of hooves echoed in her ears. The air was thick with dust and fear. The canyon swallowed them whole, and soon the cries of war faded behind her. Eleanor's heart thudded wildly, not just with panic, but with a sickening uncertainty. Where was he taking her? What would happen to her in the lands her people had warned her never to tread? They rode hard, weaving between boulders and scrub brush, ascending a narrow ridge that overlooked the chaos they'd left behind. From this vantage point, Eleanor caught a glimpse of her father's forces regrouping below soldiers tending to the fallen. Her chest ached at the sight, but another feeling crept in, an ache of doubt. Nyalona slowed the horse as the terrain grew rougher. "You will not be harmed," he said without looking at her. "But your people must learn. Words have failed. Now we show them the cost." Eleanor didn't answer. Her voice felt trapped, her thoughts spinning too fast. She had grown up hearing stories of savages, rebels, enemies to the crown of civilization. But the man riding with her, his eyes full of grief, his hands sure, but not cruel, was not the monster those stories had promised. The sun was sinking now, casting the cliffs in long, bloody shadows. As they entered a narrow pass, she saw symbols etched into the rock, ancient markings, handprints, animal shapes. This was a place of history, of memory, a place her father had called hostile territory. But it felt more like sacred ground. Eleanor closed her eyes. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the cries of the past and the uncertain future that now lay ahead. Behind her, the world she knew was cracking. Before her, something wild and unknown waited. And somewhere in the middle, she sat between two men, one who'd raised her to follow orders, and one who had just changed the course of her life with a single act of defiance. The desert didn't forget, and neither would she. The canyon walls narrowed until they formed a passage of shadows and silence. Eleanor sat stiffly in front of Nyalona, on the horse, her wrists bound loosely, her mind more entangled than the rope. The red cliffs loomed around them, their jagged edges like teeth from the mouth of something ancient, waiting to consume her whole. The heat of Nyalona's body behind her was a constant reminder that she was not free, not in control. And yet oddly, it was the first time in days she didn't feel invisible. They rode for hours deeper into land untouched by maps and unacknowledged by the world she came from. Dusk fell like a hush, painting the sky in strokes of violet and fire. When they finally reached a hidden canyon fed by a trickling spring, the Hopi warriors dismounted with the wordless efficiency. Eleanor was lifted down by Nyalona. She stumbled, legs weak from fear and the endless ride. He steadied her with surprising gentleness. She looked around, heart pounding. This place was not a prison. It was a sanctuary nestled between windswept boulders and ancient trees twisted by time. The others began preparing camp with rituals that felt more like ceremony than routine lighting fire, with flint arranging stones and patterns speaking words she did not understand. Eleanor stood apart, arms folded tight across her chest, watching every movement. She refused food when it was offered her pride a last defense. But pride didn't keep you warm when the desert night came crashing down. The temperature dropped quickly, the warmth of the sun giving way to a biting chill. Her thin riding dress offered little protection. She began to shiver. Nyalona approached silently and placed a woven blanket around her shoulders. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "Your suffering proves nothing," he said quietly. "Keep your strength. You'll need it." He sat by the fire, his profile lit by its soft glow. For a moment, Eleanor simply stared at him. This was not the savage she had imagined. There was no hatred in his movements, only grief and weariness. She wondered if anyone in her father's world had ever looked at Nylona and seen a man not a threat. Eventually, thirst overcame her stubbornness. She moved to the spring, crouched to drink from cupped hands. The water was icy and clean. She splashed some on her face, washing away a layer of dust and tears she hadn't known she'd shed. When she looked up, Nylona was watching her. "Why me?" she asked, voice cracking. He rose and walked over, holding out a piece of flatbread. "Because your father only values what he thinks he owns." She didn't take the bread at first, so, "I'm just leverage, no," he replied. "You're a chance. For your people to stop. To see." She finally accepted the food. It was dry, but not unpleasant. As she chewed, she noticed the younger warriors tending to injuries, one of them limping another with a bandaged arm. They didn't speak to her, but they didn't sneer either. Most looked no older than she. Nylona spoke again. "We lost women, children, homes." His voice didn't rise in anger. It carried the heaviness of truth. Not once. Many times. Your father promises peace, but his peace is prison. Eleanor looked away ashamed. She had heard rumors of raids of soldiers striking villages at dawn, calling them preemptive measures. She had not believed them, or had not wanted to. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't ask." That night, she lay beneath the stars, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Sleep did not come easily. Her thoughts wandered to Fort Lowell, to her mother's empty letters, to the silence her father wore, like a uniform. She thought of Lieutenant Granger, probably blaming himself. She thought of Nylona not as her captor, but as someone trying to survive. In the quiet, Nylona spoke from the other side of the fire. "Do you know the stars?" "A little," she answered. He pointed. "That is the coyote's trail. Our people say he stole fire from the gods. That streak across the sky, that is where the flames fell as he ran." She followed his finger, tracing the cluster of stars. "We call that the Milky Way." He smiled faintly. "Even in names, we see the world differently." For the first time since her capture, Eleanor felt a flicker of something unexpected. Not fear, not resentment, but wonder. How many things had she accepted without question? How many lies had been wrapped in flags and called duty? "Will you kill me if my father doesn't stand down?" she asked suddenly. Nylona didn't look at her right away. "No, but war will come, with or without you." His honesty was terrifying, and yet comforting. Eleanor stared at the fire until her eyes blurred. "Then what hope is there?" Nylona's voice came gently. "You are hope, if you choose to be." She turned on her side, the blanket pulled over her head, and cried quietly. Not from fear, but from the sudden weight of all she hadn't known. In the stillness of that sacred canyon under stars older than any war, Eleanor Whitmore began to unravel. Not as a hostage, but as a woman slowly awakening. And the desert in its quiet wisdom listened. It always did. The morning broke with a kind of stillness that made the world feel paused between heartbeats. Eleanor opened her eyes slowly, half expecting the familiar wood beams of her room at Fort Lowell. Instead, the crimson cliffs greeted her wrapped in the soft veil of desert dawn. The fire from the night before had smoldered down to ashes, but the warmth clung to her blanket like a memory that didn't want to let go. Nylona sat nearby, sharpening a blade with slow rhythmic strokes. He hadn't spoken since sunrise. Neither had she. The silence between them had grown less hostile, more contemplative, as though they were both carrying a heavy truth neither yet dared to name. As the others prepared for travel, Eleanor wandered toward the spring. She washed her face again, but this time with a sense of reverence. Water felt sacred now. Every drop earned, not assumed. Her hands lingered in the stream. She no longer looked like the daughter of a captain. Her skin was wind-burned, her clothes creased and stained, and something about her eyes had shifted. They no longer scanned the horizon for rescue, they sought meaning. Nylona approached. "We ride soon. Today is difficult." She nodded and followed him back to camp. The warriors had packed with startling speed. Everything they carried had purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was extra. They rode north deeper into Hopi land through passes that even maps had forgotten. Midway through the day, Eleanor's horse stumbled, and she fell hard against a rock. Blood pooled at her knee. Nylona dismounted in an instant. "You are hurt." "It's fine," she gritted out, trying to stand, but he was already wrapping her wound with a strip of cloth. His hands were warm, firm, and without judgment. She realized then how rarely she'd been treated with care that didn't expect something in return. Later, as they rested beneath the shade of a stone outcropping, Eleanor turned to him. "You speak English well." "My father did," he said simply. "He believed peace would come from understanding. So he taught me their language, their customs." "What happened to him?" she asked. Nylona didn't answer at first. Then, with the softness of someone reopening a wound, he believed them. He trusted their treaties. One morning, he went to meet a general outside Canyon de Chelly, said it was time for alliance. The soldiers brought gifts, smiles. Then they returned with rifles in the night. Eleanor's breath caught. She already knew the name. Canyon de Chelly. It had haunted whispers at the fort, spoken in low voices, buried beneath excuses. "They killed him," Nylona continued, "and my wife, my daughter. She was 4. There were no tears in his voice, no rage, only the kind of grief that lived in silence too long. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. She meant it. But even as she spoke, she knew her words were too small for the loss they tried to address. "You didn't fire the shot," he said. "But you rode beside those who did." She flinched. "I didn't know." Nylona nodded slowly. "You didn't ask." Those words hung in the air like a final sentence. That evening, as the sun dipped behind a ridge, casting golden light across the camp, Eleanor sat with a group of women. One handed her a bowl of herbs, gesturing how to grind them. Eleanor obeyed her hands, working the stone mortar with growing confidence. Later, an elder taught her a lullaby in the Hopi tongue. It was gentle, filled with bird calls and wind. Eleanor sang the melody back quietly, letting the foreign syllables settle on her tongue like something sacred. As dusk deepened, a storm crept in from the north. Distant thunder rolled like ancient drums. The elders gathered around the fire, telling stories of the ancestors, tales of corn spirits, mountain watchers, and rivers that once spoke. Eleanor listened, captivated. This was not superstition. This was history kept alive in memory and myth. Nylona rejoined her later, handing her a cup of sage tea. "For pain," he said, "and dreams." She sipped slowly, warmth spreading through her chest. "Do you ever wish you hadn't taken me?" He didn't look up. "I wish I'd never needed to. I don't think I would have believed any of this," she whispered. "Not unless I saw it." "That's why you're here." They sat in silence. The stars emerged brilliant and countless, stretching across the sky like stories waiting to be told. Nylona pointed upward. "That is the White Corn Mother. She brought the first light to our people. They say she still watches." "She must be disappointed," Eleanor murmured. He glanced at her, something soft in his eyes. "Maybe, or maybe she waits for someone to listen again." And for the first time, Eleanor understood what it meant to listen, not just with her ears, but with her whole soul. When sleep came, it was filled with dreams not of escape, but of hands planting seeds in dry soil, of fires that warmed instead of burned, and of a child's voice echoing through the canyons, laughing. She woke in tears, the kind of tears that cleansed something deeper than skin. Nylona was already awake, standing at the edge of the camp, staring east. Your father moves fast. How do you know he didn't answer? But she saw the weight settle in his shoulders. He was preparing to lose something again, and she knew so was she. But not everything, not herself, not anymore. The whispers of the past were no longer just his, they were hers too, and they would not be ignored. It began with a single plume of dust on the horizon, a subtle shift in the desert air, easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for. But Nylona knew. His gaze had been locked eastward since dawn. His jaw set, his posture tense, as though bracing for an old wound to reopen. Eleanor saw it too eventually. That distant motion that wasn't wind, wasn't clouds, but riders. Her father's men. Closer than expected. Faster than feared. The tribe had made good time, but not enough. The land grew rockier, harder to navigate, and the elders moved slower with each passing day. Children tired easily, horses weakened. Nylona's warriors were doing their best to protect and guide, but Eleanor could see the strain in their eyes. Every choice they made now mattered. It was Eleanor who first spoke the plan that no one dared voice. "We need to make them believe you've gone the other way." The others looked to her in silence. Nylona didn't speak at first. He simply studied her the way one might study a storm cloud, not with fear, but with caution. "If we hide the real trail and build a false one," she continued, "they'll chase the wrong path. We can buy time." "Your father is not a fool," Nylona said. "No," Eleanor agreed, "but he believes I am. He'll think I left signs by accident. He underestimates me. Let him." And so with urgency born of desperation they moved. Eleanor led a group back along the route they had taken, where she and two of the younger warriors created the illusion of a western escape. They broke branches, dragged blankets, left boot prints and dry washes. She even left behind a scarf once gifted by Lieutenant Granger, a token her father would recognize. Back at camp, the real trail leading north into a canyon known only to the Hopi was carefully concealed. Stones were overturned, dust smoothed brush retied. It was an act of deception that felt almost sacred. As they worked, Eleanor felt her blood beating with a clarity she'd never known. This wasn't just strategy, it was something more. She wasn't a pawn anymore. She wasn't even a guest. She was a shield. They finished just as the sun began to dip behind the western cliffs, turning the desert gold. The air was still expectant. Then came the sound that shattered the calm hoofbeats, shouts, the crack of a branch. The soldiers had found the false trail. Nylona turned to Eleanor. It worked. But even as he said it, a cry rang out from the ridge above. Another group of riders hidden from their view had taken a different approach. They were heading straight for the canyon's mouth. It was a trap laid in both directions. Without hesitation, Nylona grabbed Eleanor's arm. "I'll lead them away." "No," she protested, heart pounding. "They'll kill you." He shook his head. "Not if they think I have you. I won't let you die for me." Nylona looked into her eyes, and for the first time Eleanor saw the man behind the warrior. Not just pain, not just resilience, but love. Quiet, fierce, and resolute. "You gave us a chance," he said. "Now, I must give you one." Before she could stop him, he pulled her into a kiss. It was brief, urgent, and filled with everything they could not say. Then he lifted her onto another horse and spoke rapidly to a warrior named Casa. "She'll take you through the mountains. Trust her." Nylona Eleanor started, but he was already turning. His horse responded instantly, galloping back toward the open valley, toward the danger. Eleanor watched until the dust swallowed him. Kassa urged her mount forward. They rode through narrow passages over slick stone under natural arches that looked like the bones of giants. The path twisted higher, cooler, quieter. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded, but Eleanor's heart stayed loud in her chest. They didn't stop until nightfall. When they finally dismounted in a grove of pine near a hidden spring, Eleanor's legs gave way beneath her. Kassa caught her gently. "He will return," the warrior said, voice low. But Eleanor couldn't answer. She was too full of the memory of Nyalona's kiss, the weight of his choice. She stared into the fire that night, eyes dry, body still. Something inside her had broken open, not in grief but in purpose. She thought of her father riding behind a lie. She thought of the young warriors risking everything. She thought of Nylona somewhere out there in the dark. And she made a vow, silent and strong. If they survived this, if Nylona returned, she would never leave this land again. Not as a visitor, not as a hostage, but as someone who finally understood where she belonged, in the heart of a people she had once been taught to fear, in the arms of a man who had risked everything to protect more than just her life. He had protected her truth, and now she would carry it forward no matter where the road led next. When the sun rose the next morning, it bathed the valley in soft amber light, casting long shadows that crept slowly across the rocks and sagebrush. The world felt paused again, as if nature itself held its breath. Eleanor stood on a ridge above the makeshift camp the tribe had carved into the wilderness, watching the first rays slide across pine-covered slopes and ripple over the silver ribbon of a stream below. Behind her, the camp slowly stirred, but in her chest something beat with urgency. Nylona had not returned. She had held hope all night, whispering prayers into the stillness, bargaining with gods she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. She'd imagined him riding over the next hill bloodied, but smiling, teasing her for doubting his return. But the dawn brought no horse, no shadow, no sound of hoofbeats. Instead, it brought Kassa, who climbed the ridge silently and stood beside her. She didn't speak at first. Neither did Eleanor. They watched the valley together. "He led them far," Kassa said finally. "Long enough for us to disappear." Eleanor turned, but he didn't come back. Kassa hesitated. Not yet. It wasn't comfort. But it wasn't final either. Hours passed. The tribe packed again, quieter this time. The older ones didn't ask questions. They had lived too many winters, buried too many suns. Eleanor helped where she could, tying bundles, lifting children into wagons made of bent branches and leather. She moved like one of them now. No one questioned her place. By midday, they reached a new canyon, deeper, narrower, hidden beneath an overhang of red stone. It was clear this wasn't just another stop. It had been prepared long before, perhaps by ancestors who had known exile all too well. Small caves lined the rock face, stocked with dried herbs, blankets, even seeds. This wasn't a camp, it was sanctuary. Eleanor chose the farthest shelter, one half covered in ivy, and laid out supplies for wounded that hadn't yet arrived. The silence was no longer terrifying. It was sacred. But then came the sound she had yearned for, a sharp whistle. Not birdsong, not wind. A call. She ran, toward the path, toward the cry. Two riders emerged from the trees, one upright, the other slumped. Kassa leapt forward to take the reins, and Eleanor's knees gave as she saw him. Nylona, his body bloodied face, pale eyes closed. He was alive. Barely. They carried him to her shelter, and Eleanor knelt beside him, hands trembling, but focused. She tore fabric for bandages, boiled water, cleaned the wounds with herbs Kahi had taught her to use. The bullet had lodged in his thigh, festering. He'd ridden like that for days. He should have died. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, brushing hair from his forehead. His eyes opened faint but steady. "You waited. I'll always wait." He smiled just barely, then slept. For 2 days and nights, Eleanor barely left his side. When fever came, she cooled his skin with cloth soaked in spring water. When he cried out in dreams, she held his hand and whispered old lullabies. The tribe came and went, offering food, help, prayers. On the 3rd night, Kehi joined her by the fire. "He is yours now," the old woman said. "You are not one of us by blood, but you are one of us by choice." Eleanor looked at the sleeping figure beside her. "Then I choose, now, always." Weeks passed, the valley blossomed. Spring broke through the frost, and the tribe began to rebuild. They planted corn in rocky soil, drew fresh water from the stream. The children laughed again, the elders sang, and Eleanor stayed. She wrote letters to her father, unsure if they would reach him, unsure if he would believe they were hers. She told him she was safe. She told him she had found something more than survival. She told him she was not returning. Nylona recovered slowly. He walked with a cane at first, but the strength returned to his stride and the fire to his voice. They were wed in the valley beneath the old cliff with Kai and the children as witnesses. The ceremony was neither fully Hopi nor fully Christian. It was something new, something wholly theirs. They wore bands of braided leather and traded promises in both languages. They kissed, and the valley echoed with cheers. After the wedding, they walked the high ridge where Eleanor had first watched the sunrise alone. Now she stood beside him, fingers entwined. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She looked over the valley, the fields, the people, the sacred quiet. "I left comfort. I left safety. But I found truth. And love." She smiled, "Especially love." He nodded. "Your father still searches." "I know. He might search forever." "Are you afraid?" "No," she said, "because I know who I am now." They walked down together, shadows stretching before them. There would be hard winters ahead, more danger, more decisions, but they would face them as one, because somewhere along this journey through war, through capture, through heartbreak, they had found more than refuge. They had found home. Eleanor Whitmore's journey began not with a choice, but with a command from a father, from a system, from a world that expected her to follow and obey. She left the fort in Arizona under the banner of diplomacy duty and family honor. But somewhere between the dry rocks of the desert and the red cliffs of Hopi land, something cracked open inside her, a longing, a question, a quiet rebellion. What if everything she had been taught was only one side of a much larger story, taken by a man who was supposed to be her enemy? Eleanor expected fear, captivity, cruelty. Instead, she found a truth far more dangerous: compassion. She discovered a people wounded by promises, broken lives, uprooted, families shattered. Yet despite their losses, they showed her respect, kindness, and eventually belonging. It was through Nylona's eyes, filled with grief, yet never hate, that she saw the depth of what had been taken from them. As she helped the tribe move, hide and survive, Eleanor found herself transformed. No longer the observer, no longer merely the captive, she became a protector, a voice, a partner. She made choices that defied her upbringing and ultimately rewrote her future. The love that grew between her and Nylona was not born of convenience or drama. It was forged through fire, through quiet conversations under starlit skies, and through shared pain. Their union was more than romantic. It was symbolic. A bridge between two ways of life, two histories, two futures. In a land soaked in conflict and silence, their voices created a harmony that echoed through the canyon walls. Together, they reclaimed what had always been sacred dignity, heritage, and the right to build something new from the ashes of the old. Nylona's near-death return was not the climax, it was the rebirth. Eleanor's steadfast care, the tribe's unwavering support, and his own fierce will to live created a second beginning. When they married, under the watchful gaze of elders and children, they didn't just become husband and wife. They became leaders of a quiet revolution. In the valley that had once symbolized hiding and loss, they built a home. Not the kind made of polished floors and stone chimneys, but of woven traditions, laughter, and acceptance. Eleanor wrote letters to her father not out of guilt, but in hope that he might one day understand what she had come to learn. She didn't ask for approval, she simply shared her truth. Her truth was this: there are no enemies where there is understanding, and no peace where there is ignorance. Her transformation wasn't sudden. It came slowly through every shared meal, every song sung in a language she'd once feared, every act of courage by people she was once taught to pity. She learned that true heritage isn't something kept behind glass or written in books. It's lived in the rhythm of everyday life, in the stories told around fires, in the hands that build and the hearts that forgive. The world outside the valley didn't change overnight, but Eleanor did. And because she did, she became a ripple in a much larger wave. She taught the children to read and write both English and Hopi. She helped the tribe plant new crops using techniques from both worlds. She braided her hair with feathers and silk. She stitched letters and legends into cloth. She became the bridge her marriage had symbolized, and Alona, once seen only as a rebel, became known as a leader of vision and grace. There were still threats. Armies still marched. Prejudice still whispered. But now there was something stronger to meet them. Unity, community, legacy. And this is where the story leaves us, not in triumph or tragedy, but in transformation. The lesson we draw from Eleanor's path is simple but profound. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to confront truth even when it threatens the world you knew. We live in a time where division still exists between generations, cultures, and beliefs. But Eleanor's story teaches us that healing begins not with victory, but with understanding. We must ask the hard questions. We must listen without defense. We must walk, even if uninvited, into the unfamiliar, and find what unites us in our shared humanity. Apply this to your life today. Is there someone you've misunderstood? Is there a truth you've avoided because it challenges your comfort? Maybe, like Eleanor, you are being called not to run, but to listen, not to return to the way things were, but to forge something entirely new. And when you do, when you step into that valley of new beginnings, you might find that love in its truest form is waiting there for you. Not the kind we see in stories of perfection, but the kind that survives storms, betrayal, and silence. The kind that builds homes not on land, but on trust. The kind that lives in quiet acts of daily bravery. We believe stories like Eleanor's are more than entertainment. They are reminders of what we've lost, what we can reclaim, and what we might still become. If this story touched your heart, inspired reflection, or awakened a part of you that longs for something deeper, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories like this, filled with history, emotion, and timeless lessons that transcend the page. We're just getting started. Join us on this journey through the untamed past and toward a future shaped by hope and understanding. Subscribe now. And remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new frontier.